So good evening dear students, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 25th October 2024 and today we have some important articles for the discussion, and one by one we'll try to discuss all these important articles in a very detailed manner so that this discussion will be helpful for your examination, right? So it adds value to your preparation. So one by one we'll try to discuss all these important articles, and before discussing them, you all knew that yesterday in previous lecture I have given one prelims practice question. So the question is, which organization is responsible for allocating deep sea mining permits? So the correct answer for this question is International Seabed Authority. So International Seabed Authority is the organization which is responsible for allocating deep sea mining permits for any country. And if you look at the explanation or solution for yesterday's prelims practice question, so International Seabed Authority, so it is an authority which is established by United Nations Convention on Law of the Seas. So this convention is also known as UN CLOS, and in fact International Seabed Authority is an intergovernmental organization, and in fact this International Seabed Authority is responsible for regulating mineral related activities in the international seabed area which lies beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. So we all knew that when we look into the jurisdiction of different countries over marine resources over the seas, so there is a contiguous zone, a territorial zone, contiguous zone, and as well as the exclusive economic zone as well. So beyond exclusive economic zone is known as the region which is open seas or global commons. So however, within national jurisdictions beyond the limits of national jurisdiction, International Seabed Authority generally provide or give permits for the seabed mining. And in fact, so this includes the allocation of permits for deep sea mining and also ensuring that these activities are conducted for the benefit of mankind as a whole, so while protecting the marine environment as well. So this International Seabed Authority, its mandate covers the exploration as well as exploitation of resources such as polymetallic nodules, polymetallic sulfides, and cobalt-rich ferromanganese crusts. And in fact, within the Indian Ocean as well, India has been planning to explore the deep sea mineral resources, particularly the polymetallic nodules. So in order to do so, Indian government has been launching various initiatives. One such initiative is Samudrayan initiative, right? So today we have one important prelims practice question. So try to answer this question in the comment section. So the question is, in the context of Indian Parliament, so who administers the oath of pro tem speaker of the Lok Sabha? So when we talk about the pro tem speaker, so when any new government is formed, so in first few sessions pro tem speaker is elected for temporary purposes. So before the speaker of the Lok Sabha is elected, so that particular individual who leads the session of the Lok Sabha is known as pro tem speaker in first few sessions of the new government is being formed. So in the context of Indian Parliament, who administers the oath of pro tem speaker of the Lok Sabha? Options are the President of India, the Prime Minister of India, the Chief Justice of India, and Secretary General of Lok Sabha. So this is also a very important question, and so if you have some basic understanding about this, so if you have some conceptual clarity, you can answer this question very easily, and try to answer this question in the comment section, and the explanation or solution for this question will be provided to you in tomorrow's class. So the first article that we are going to discuss today is Israel and Gaza conflict and the response of the Global South. Now what is Global South? So Global South is a geographical location or geographical region which is having common features or common characteristics. So in terms of development, less developed and higher levels of illiteracy, lower levels of economic growth, lower levels of infrastructure development, and lower levels of social indicators in those respective countries, higher population and demographic dividend, and lower levels of standard of living. So these are all the common characteristics or features of the global south. So what is the response of the global south to this Gaza war by Israel, right? So we all knew that once. So in 2023 Hamas attacked Israel. So it was considered as a terrorist attack on Israel, and Israel has launched a retaliatory attack on Hamas, mostly the Gaza Strip, and it has led to a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And what is the response of the global south? Remember that both India and China are part of the global south. So in this article we'll try to understand what is the actual response of both India and China and what should be the way forward in this context. So the context is that, so as I've already told you, that the global south seems to be showing a fragmented approach to this crisis. So in fact, so global south is one single geographical region, but when it comes to the response or reaction to the war in Gaza, the global south response is fragmented, it is divided. So all countries are not supporting in fact, the voice of all these countries is divided. There are divisions. For example, one country supporting Israel, other country condemning Israel, and one country is strongly, in solidarity with the Gaza, or the people who have been facing humanitarian crisis. And so we can say that there are divisions, and there is a huge fragmentation which is existing when it comes to global south's response to this war in Gaza Strip. Now when I say global south, I would like to tell you what exactly is global south. Now global south is a geographical region, in fact, Asia, most of Asia, that includes South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa, Latin America, right? So Africa and Latin America. So all these countries are part of the global south. Don't you think that these countries have common features or common characteristics? So those common characteristics including higher levels of poverty, right? So most of these countries are poor countries, and lower levels of economic development, and in fact, apart from economic development, per capita incomes of these countries, per capita income are also low in these countries, and lower level of infrastructure development, and highly vulnerable to climate change and climate change driven disasters, civil wars, political instability, lack of democracy. So don't you think that all these countries in the global south have been facing these similar kind of problems, right? So in fact, India considers itself as the leader of the global south. Similarly, China also considers itself as the leader of the global south, because global south consists of many number of countries. So therefore it benefits either China or India. So if they lead those respective countries in the global south. So we'll discuss this, how the response of the global south is fragmented. So the killing of Hamas chief Yahya Sinwar. So in fact, one airstrike by Israel has led to the killing of Yahya Sinwar. So Yahya Sinwar was a chief of Hamas, and in fact Yahya Sinwar was considered as mastermind of October attacks on Israel, right? So he died on October 16, 2024, and it ended a critical aim for the Jewish state. Now here, what is a Jewish state? So Israel is a Jewish state, and in fact one of the key aims of Israel is Hamas chief Yahya Sinwar. And in fact, Sinwar took over the reins of Hamas only some months ago, after the assassination of then chief Ismail Haniyeh in Iran. And in July 2024, it was known to be a main architect, and he was a main architect of the October 7, 2023 terror attacks on Israel, right? So Israel said to Israel took the revenge for October 7 terrorist attack on Israel. Now, what are the key and critical aims of Israel in this war? So Israel has certain aims, so we'll try to discuss what are those critical aims of Israel. And in fact, so as of now, if you look at the present condition or the present situation in the Middle East, particularly in the context of relation between Israel's war with the Gaza or Hamas, so Israel has gained a lot of things in this war, right? So with the elimination of a number of leaders from Hamas, for example, Israel successfully eliminated Ismail Haniyeh. In Iran, he was also the chief of Hamas, and then next chief of Hamas, Hania Sinwar. So he was also assassinated by Israeli military. Right, so a plethora of leaders were eliminated. They belong to Hamas and Hezbollah. Now remember that Hezbollah is a Shia militant organization, and it is also known as a proxy organization, right? So a proxy organization of Iran, right? So in fact, there are tensions between Iran and Israel as well, and in fact Hezbollah very often acts against Israel on behalf of Iran in the Middle East. So Israel successfully eliminated the leaders of both Hamas and Hezbollah terror organizations, right? So in fact, we could say that both these militant organizations pose serious security challenges for Israel from last 1 year, right? So there are a lot of civilian casualties in Gaza. So on an effort or on an attempt to wipe out all militant cadres who belong to Hamas. Now what Israel has been doing, Israel has been indiscriminately bombing the entire Gaza territory. So that has led to a lot of civilian casualty. In fact, there are news reports also coming out that Israel has been attacking hospitals where there were a lot of civilians were killed, right? So now Lebanon also facing the wrath of Israel, right? So in fact, both Lebanon as well as Gaza have been suffering with the political instability, right? So both these countries are worst impacted by this conflict between Israel and Hamas. And what is the reaction of US to this particular conflict? Now if you look at the reaction of US, so US is a regular constant supporter of Israel in this Israel-Hamas war, and in fact the United States paralyzed with its own domestic electoral requirements now. So USA has been going for elections this year, so therefore USA is in the election mode, so therefore it is unable to turn the keys towards a ceasefire, and others have increasingly looked towards alternatives including India and China as well. So since US is not able to play an effective role in preventing or checking this humanitarian crisis or alleviating this humanitarian crisis or convincing Israel to stop this war, now most of the countries in the Middle East looking for the other potential players in the region, particularly India and China. So don't you think that India and China are potential players in the Middle East because their geopolitical weight has been increasing considerably in recent times, and India is also known as the net security provider in the region, and India also has a significant goodwill, soft power and influence in the Middle Eastern region. In terms of infrastructure development, in terms of investments, trade, China also has a considerable influence in the Middle Eastern region. So therefore most of the countries in the Middle East have been looking for the alternatives, particularly India and China. And there are different countries, and what are their moves specifically, we'll try to understand that, right? So in fact, in recent times, due to indiscriminate bombing of Gaza and some parts of Lebanon, so Israel has lost a lot of goodwill that it has generated in most of the countries, particularly in the global south, right? So in fact, we could say that there are some sections or some portions where some portions of both India and China where the goodwill on Israel has been lost considerably, right? So in fact, on this Israel and Hamas war, both China and India have taken divergent views. So their views are completely different, their position is different, so which are anchored around their individual national interest. Remember that national interest is the supreme or only guiding principle of these countries when they are acting in the international politics. So therefore, the positions which are taken by both India and China are primarily guided by their national interest rather than trying to build a consensus within a newer multilateral format such as BRICS. So we cannot say that BRICS is a new multilateral format, rather it is an old multilateral format. Rather, in recent times, few member countries from the Middle East are also become part of the BRICS grouping, particularly Egypt became part of it, and Ethiopia became part of it, Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE. So those countries also became part of it. So instead of taking a consensus, building a consensus over this war, a humanitarian crisis in the Middle East, rather both India and China have divergent or different positions over this war, right? So this divergence between these two Asian powers, both India and China, representing over a third of global population. So don't you think that both India and China together comprises of 33% of the global population? So since they have a huge majority population and they are taking a divergent positions, they have a different opinions, so that ultimately decides the rudder's of what global south is, despite the non-monolith nature of this particular construct. Okay, so what is India's consistent position on this Israel war, right? So if you look at India's consistent position, so it is consistent and balanced, no doubt about that, and India always stands for two-state solution. Okay, so a peaceful two-state solution is what that India has been advocating for. Now what is this two-state solution? So you can clearly see that this is Gaza Strip, and Gaza Strip is part of the Palestinian territory, and apart from Gaza Strip, so this region is also West Bank, and West Bank is also a Palestinian territory. Now what India has been advocating, so India has been advocating that these two states, both Israel and Palestine, should exist together as two different states. So India very often advocating for peaceful two-state solution, so without any violence, without conflict or tensions between these two countries, because remember that India always have a balanced position, right? So India never take us a particular stand on one. So India never take a positions in favor of one country against another country. So we need to balance the different interests, right? So conflicting interests. So as part of it, so there are two territories, so two states, Israel and Palestine. So India historically supported the peaceful two-state solution, so which is in line with India's national interest as well as its international obligations. And in fact, many analysts who believe that Indian approach to the conflict have been skewed approach, right? So in fact, India's approach was criticized. So if I can tell you that India follows the policy of dehyphenation, right? So India follows the policy of dehyphenation. So this is what is India's policy. So in fact, India's policy towards Israel and in the region, with respect to this conflict or the violence which has been taking place in the Middle East is very often criticized, giving tacit yet critical support, and this is not an entirely incorrect view of things. And in fact, contrasting to the Chinese approach, so Indian approach contrasting to Chinese approach, so India also sees this from the view of countering terrorism, because remember that India very often views Israel as a country which is located which is located with a complex and a complicated neighborhood similar to India. And India also believes that Israel time and again has been facing the problem of terrorism as like India. So therefore, terrorism is one aspect and it is one dimension which has been bringing both Israel and India together. So to put this into perspective, beyond their different domestic and regional realities, both India and China suffer, both India and Israel suffer from the designs of cross-border terrorism. Now, India has been suffering with the cross-border terrorism. There is no doubt about that, because Pakistan has been promoting cross-border terrorism. So, so to some extent from Bangladesh also cross-border terrorism, and even Israel has also been suffering from this cross-border terrorism. So October 16th attack, right, so October 7th attack on Israel is also considered as a cross-border terrorist attack. So therefore, terrorism is one dimension which has been bringing these two countries together, right? So ultimately we could say that the war in Gaza has shown that while the idea of America's Pax Americana design is diminishing. Now, what does it means when I say Pax Americana? Now, Pax Americana is symbolizing the domination of US, right? So domination of US in the Middle East. So this war and America's inability to do anything which could stop this war, which could prevent this humanitarian crisis. So America as of now is unable to do so. So therefore we could say that the Pax Americana design is clearly diminishing. So finding a fewer takers within the US itself, and alternatives remain a distant realities. And in fact, India-China contestation by itself undermines any real unity within the global south. So we can say that there is no unity in the global south when it comes to taking a stand against the Israel and Gaza crisis or conflict, right? Because so two major countries in the global south, both China and India, have been taking different views. They have different positions on this Israel conflict. So therefore we could say that it undermines the unity of the entire global south. So apart from that, there are other disparities also, such as democracies versus non-democracies within the global south. So they also present more and more barriers to navigate this issue. And in fact, the true mediation between Israel and Palestine relies on political and military power to mobilize and even exploit the leverages which are existing, and no power in the global south individually or collectively has the correct tools in place to project such influence in the West Asia today. So the author clearly mentioning that neither India nor China have the power to do so, right? So power to mobilize both political and military power within the Middle East to mediate and even exploit the existing leverages, right? So therefore, whatever little such projection is witnessed is more about individual interests of those respective countries rather than any collective aim to design, promote, and even most importantly guarantee peace for these respective countries. So ultimately, it is very important that when we talk about Israel-Gaza crisis, we need to keep in mind humanitarian issue. So humanitarian issues needs to be prioritized. Apart from humanitarian issues, national interest is another area that we need to talk about, right? So national interest. So apart from that, terrorism. So terrorism should attract zero toleration, and terrorism in any form should be condemned, and that should be the policy of India. And national interest should also be one of the primary goal of India's approach to the Middle East. So, and apart from that, India should act as a responsible player, right? So responsible player, so that further strengthens India's goodwill as well as soft power, right? So, and India should reorient its two-state solution policy. Two-state solution policy requires more pragmatism. So it should be more pragmatic policy. So that's how you can suggest a way forward in this answer, and also make sure that you remember all these areas. So these are very, very important areas from your examination perspective, right? So all these are very important because previously Golan Heights was asked in the question, right? So Dead Sea was also asked in the prelims examination. So all these things are very, very important, so you keep in mind. And second question, second article that we are going to discuss is about cyclone, Dana cyclone in the eastern coast of India, particularly in Bay of Bengal, which struck the coast of Odisha. So the name of the cyclone is Dana, right? So Dana or Dana, so D-A-N-A. So Dana begins landfall along the Odisha coast. Now in this context, we will understand a few things about tropical cyclones, because remember that it is your main topic, and this is also very important. What are tropical cyclones and how they are being formed? What are the conditions favorable for these tropical cyclones? What are the names? What are different names for these tropical cyclones? We'll try to understand this in a very detailed manner, right? So we'll first understand the context. Context is a severe cyclonic storm, and in fact cyclone Dana is considered as a severe cyclonic storm that has made landfall on the Odisha coast on the night of October 24. And in fact the storm made a landfall at a speed of 100 to 110 km per hour, gusting at around 120 km per hour. Now in fact, so you can see all the people who are evacuated from the vulnerable areas or areas which are considered as low lying, and in fact the government has established relief camps for the people, and all people who are located in low lying vulnerable areas were shifted to these relief camps, so until this conditions becomes normal, right? So therefore these relief camps were established. Now we'll try to understand what is a tropical cyclone, right? So what is a tropical cyclone? So cyclones that develop in regions between tropics of Capricorn and Tropic of Cancer are called as tropical cyclones, right? So if you look at the globe, right, so this is not the correct representation of it, right? So if you look at the globe, so I hope you knew about equator and Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. So the cyclones which originate in between Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn are known as the tropical cyclones. So in this region, so if any cyclones originate, so they are known as tropical cyclones. And in fact World Meteorological Organization, so that uses the term tropical cyclone, right? So it uses the term tropical cyclone to cover weather systems in which winds exceed a gale force. Now gale force is minimum 34 knots, maximum 63 km per hour. So based on the gale force of the winds, World Meteorological Organization so uses the term tropical cyclones. And in fact tropical cyclones are a progeny of ocean and even atmosphere, and these tropical cyclones are very often powered by heat or temperatures of sea. So temperature of sea is the main reason for the origin of these cyclones, and in fact these cyclones are very often driven by the easterly trade winds, right? So they are driven by easterly trade winds, not just easterly trade winds, and they are also driven by the westerlies. So what are these westerlies and easterly trade winds? So when we talk about these different wind types based on the pressure differences across the globe, because because of solar insolation, there are pressure differences, right? So these pressure differences creates these different winds, easterly trade winds as well as westerly winds. Now these two types of winds are responsible for the origin of the cyclones, along with high planetary winds and their own fierce energy. So all these factors are responsible for the emergence of these tropical cyclones. And in fact, so if you are looking for a pure definition of what is a tropical cyclone, so tropical cyclone is a weather phenomenon, right? So a very simple definition, it is a weather phenomenon which is formed only over warm ocean waters near the equator. Okay, so warm ocean waters are the main a causative factor for the formation of these tropical cyclones. So there are certain conditions which favors the formation of those tropical cyclones. So we'll just look into those conditions which are responsible for the formation of tropical cyclones, right? So there are 5 different conditions which favors the formation of these tropical cyclones. Okay, so if you look at those conditions, firstly temperature, right? So ocean water temperature, or it is also known as the sea surface temperatures. So sea surface temperature is one factor. So whenever sea surface temperature is 27 degrees or more, so this is one factor which results in origin of a low pressure system or a tropical cyclone. And secondly, Coriolis force is also responsible for this, right? So what exactly is a Coriolis force? So when we talk about this Coriolis force, now this is equator, right? So the Coriolis force makes the winds shift towards the left side in the southern hemisphere. So when winds cross this northern hemisphere, a Coriolis force makes the winds to turn towards the right side, right? So that's how the southwest monsoon hits the Kerala's coast, right? So this is known as Coriolis force, and Coriolis force is maximum at poles, right? So it is maximum at poles and it is minimum at equator, right? So you just understand this presence of Coriolis force is also responsible for this. And small differences in the vertical wind speed of vertical wind speed differences are also responsible for the formation of cyclones. And in fact there should be a pre-existing low pressure area or a low level cyclonic circulation, a low level of cyclonic circulation which is existing over a particular region along with these conditions, and an upper divergence above the sea level system. So all these factors are responsible for the formation or cyclones. So you can also see how these tropical cyclones are being formed. And in fact these tropical cyclones are called with different names at different places. For example, they're being called as hurricanes in the West Indian Islands in the Caribbean Sea and Atlantic Ocean. So if you look at the map, so the Caribbean Sea and Caribbean Sea is located in between Northern America and Southern America, so Atlantic Ocean. So those tropical cyclones are known as hurricanes. And tornadoes, so they form at Guinea lands of West Africa and southern part of USA. And typhoons are formed in northwestern Pacific Ocean, particularly affecting East and Southeast Asia, Japan, Philippines, China and Taiwan regions. And cyclones in the southwestern Indian Ocean, off the coast of Africa, Madagascar, Southeast Indian Ocean, and Southwest Pacific Ocean. So these are known as cyclones. And Willy Willy, an informal term used for tropical cyclones in Australia, right? So these are different tropical cyclones, they called with different names. And there are some differences between tropical cyclones as well as temperate cyclones. So this is also very important from your exam perspective. So you must go through the differences between both tropical as well as the temperate cyclones, right? So the next important article is Indian Council for Cultural Relations. So this is known as Indian Council for Cultural Relations Conference on Pali as Classical Language, right? So in fact, recently 6 different languages were recognized as part of classical languages, right? Classical languages. Now what are the languages which were recognized as classical languages before? For example, Tamil, Telugu, Sanskrit, Kannada, Malayalam, Odia. So these were 6 classical languages that earlier union government has recognized part of classical languages, but recently what happened was due to increased demand to include more and more languages as part of the classical languages, new languages were also added to this list in the year 2024, just recently, right? So what are those languages? So one of the language which has been included as part of the classical language is Pali, right? So along with Pali, Bengali and Assamese, Marathi, right? So all these different languages were included as part of the classical language. Now what is the historical importance of Pali? Remember that Buddhism and Jainism as a social movements, right, a socio-religious reform movements in ancient times, so they preached their ideas through the language of Pali, and in fact Pali is known as the language of the masses, right? Language of the masses, because majority number of people used to speak Pali, either Pali or Prakrit language, and in fact Sanskrit is known as the language of elite, right? So language of elite, because not many people used to speak this language during ancient times, right? So most of the people used to speak in either Pali or Prakrit languages. So recently Pali language has been included as part of the classical languages of India. So therefore Indian Council for Cultural Relations recently held a conference of Buddhist monks and scholars in Colombo on bequeathing Pali the status of classical language by the Indian government. So Indian government has accorded Pali a classical language status. Now we'll try to understand some facts about the Indian Council of Cultural Relations, because it is important from your prelims point of view, right? So Indian Council for Cultural Relations is an autonomous body, and it is under the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. And in fact, so Indian Council of Cultural Relations very often involved in India's external cultural relations through cultural exchange with other countries and their people. And in fact, Indian Council of Cultural Relations promotes through its network of cultural centers and Indian culture abroad. And Indian Council of Cultural Relations was founded in the year 1950 by Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, so independent India's first education minister. Now what are the objectives of India's Council of Cultural Relations? So to actively participate in the formulation and implementation of policies, programs pertaining to India's external cultural relations, and to foster and even strengthen cultural relations and even mutual understanding between India and other countries. So these are the basic objectives of Indian Council for Cultural Relations, right? And so today we have one important mains practice question regarding the interlinking of rivers. So this is also a very important question, so particularly from gender studies paper 3 perspective, right? So we'll try to understand what are the benefits of interlinking of rivers, what are the challenges. So we'll understand this in a very detailed manner. So the question is, interlinking of rivers for transferring water from surplus basin to water deficit basins is of national importance and has been taken up on high priority and critically analyze its feasibility. And here the critically analyzed word is the directive word. So that means that you need to write about the why it is a national priority, why it is important to interlink the rivers to transfer the surplus to transfer water from the surplus basins to the deficit basins, and what are the challenges which are existing and what should be the way forward. So that's how you need to approach this particular question, right? So in the introduction, what you will write? So in the introduction, so we all knew that so you just write what is the interlinking of rivers in India. So you just write that the river interlinking project generally aims to link India's rivers by a network of reservoirs and canals, right? So that will allow for their water capacities to be shared and redistributed across all these reservoirs and canals, and it also enables transferring water from the surplus basins to the deficit basins. And in fact, some experts also claims that this is an engineered panacea that will reduce persistent floods in some parts and water shortages in other parts, besides facilitating the generation of hydroelectricity for increasingly power hungry country like India. So that's how you can write this introduction, and if possible you can also write some data about the interlinking of rivers, and you can also write some examples of interlinking of rivers that took place. For example, Ken Betwa interlinking project, right? So Ken Betwa river interlinking and Godavari Krishna river interlinking. So you can write such examples, so in order to make it more and more impactful, and if possible you can also draw a diagram so indicating how rivers are being interlinked across different parts of the country, so that would further adds value to your answer. Now, what are the opportunities arising out of river interlinking projects? So there are certain opportunities which could arise out of river interlinking projects. For example, this will help cut farmers' dependence on monsoon rains by bringing millions of hectares of cultivable land under irrigation, right? So what it will do? So it will bring the uncultivable land under cultivation, and it will also significantly reduce farmers' dependence on monsoon, because in India, a majority of the land is rain fed. Okay, so the majority of the land is rain fed, and in fact agriculture in India is also known as the rain fed agriculture, because most of the agriculture in India is dependent on the monsoon, either southwest or northeast monsoon. And interlinking of rivers would further increase crop productivity and even the revenues of the state. So first thing that we need to consider is income security for the farmers. So because it increases incomes for the farmers by bringing in uncultivable land into cultivation, and farmers can also cultivate more and more crops in that particular land. Even one bad monsoon has a direct and debilitating economic impact. So therefore, so if we link the rivers, so that would help in better utilization or efficient utilization of existing water resources, and even preventing the wasteful flows of water into the sea. And river interlinking project will also ease the water shortages in western and southern India, because western and southern parts of India, they also gets rainfall, but most of the rivers in the western part of India and southern part of India are not perennial rivers, right? So they are seasonal rivers. I hope you know what are these seasonal rivers. So seasonal rivers have water only during the monsoon times. So therefore, but on the other hand, the northern rivers are perennial rivers, so interlinking will certainly help different parts of India which have been facing the water shortages. So so that will help in mitigating the impact of recurrent floods in the eastern part of India as well, right? So fulfilling water needs would also impact the socio-economic life of people, so that will help end poverty or alleviate poverty as well, because in India majority people still engaged in the agriculture sector, and we are the country still have concerns regarding poverty, hunger, malnutrition. So all these challenges can be effectively addressed by linking rivers and also providing adequate amount of water as well. And need for interlinking of rivers to prevent interstate water disputes, right? So there are a lot of interstate water disputes, and for example, one such water dispute is between Tamil Nadu and Karnataka over the Kaveri river water distribution, right? So interlinking of rivers would help alleviate these problems by adequate allocation of river waters to different parts of India. And in fact, potential benefits of transportation through navigation, inland waterways can be developed, as well as broadening income sources in rural areas through fishing as well. So however, interlinking of rivers is not free from the challenges. There are a lot of challenges that have to be addressed. So if we wanted to link the rivers, right, so there is a variability of rainfall is very high in India. So this is the main source in India. So rainfall is the main source of water in India. So variability of rainfall in India, so sometimes we would experience flood and sometimes we would experience drought simultaneously within states of Bihar and Maharashtra. And in fact, irrigation potential from interlinking rivers will have a limited impact. So it has to be scientifically studied what should be the irrigation potential of interlinking of rivers, and it would also create interstate disputes as well, right? So because water from one state is being transported into the another state once we link the rivers, so interstate water disputes. And in fact, net national irrigated area from big dams has decreased, and India's irrigated area has gone up primarily due to the groundwater. And in fact, around 85 to 90% of the agriculture water is coming from the groundwater, right? So therefore this would be another major challenge. And the expenditure, so expenditure would be another major problem. So that government will the expenditure is very huge. It requires a lot of finances, so therefore the government has to take loans from the foreign sources, which would increase the burden on the government, and the country will fall in the debt trap. And river interlinking project will adversely affect the land, forest, biodiversity, and rivers, and livelihood of millions of people, because they have to be displaced. So once we link the rivers, so people who are original inhabitants of different areas have to be displaced. Rehabilitation, resettlement problems would be created. And the best example would be Kane Betwa link interlinking of river. So that could even threaten 200 square kilometers of Panna Tiger Reserve, which is critical and as well as ecologically very sensitive region as well. So you have to discuss a way forward as part of the conclusion in the answer. So no doubt that interlinking of rivers is a long-term plan, right? So a long-term plan, a feasible study, a scientific study has to be conducted about the feasibility of interlinking of rivers. So accordingly a steps needs to be taken, right? So because that could benefit the whole country. So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.